Introduction of visitors.
Mr. Speaker, in your gallery, representing the federal constituency of Crowfoot, Mr. Arnold Malone.
Mr. Speaker, I have the great pleasure today to introduce to you members of the Assembly, two distinguished members of Parliament who have been meeting this morning with the members of the government, both of them representing the Progressive Conservative Party in the Federal House of Commons, and my longtime friend, the Member of Parliament for Medicine Hat, Bob Porter, accompanied by Paul Gagnon, the member for Calgary North. I would ask that they rise and members gallery and be welcomed by the House.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to introduce my counterpart from the province of British Columbia, who, in addition to holding the portfolio of education in the current British Columbia legislature, was at one point the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, the Minister of Agriculture, and the Minister of Energy. I would ask Jim Hewitt to rise and receive the welcome of this Assembly.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 210, the Code of Ethics and Conduct Act. The bill would establish a code of ethics and conduct for cabinet ministers, members of the Legislative Assembly, senior executive council staff, and heads of Crown corporations.
The honourable member for Edmonton Norwood has moved first reading of Bill 210, Code of Ethics and Conduct Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? So ordered.
A bill being Code of Ethics and Conduct Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Martin, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I'm filing with the Assembly today copies of the releases by the Department of National Defence and the Strategic Air Command as requested by the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Introduction of special guests.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce through you and to the members of the legislature a special guest today in the public gallery. The guest is a cousin of mine from Italy. It's the first time that our two families have made a first-hand contact since her parents left Canada in the 1920s. We have had this week a very interesting time through an interpreter comparing backgrounds and family heritage. Accompanying her today is my sister Doreen Scredding and as well Mary Weber, and I'd be very pleased to have them stand at this time and acknowledged by the Assembly.
Speaker, I'd like to introduce to the Assembly, through you, a group who are visiting with us today. They're seated in the Members Gallery, sponsored by the Canadian Council of Christians and Jews. They are involved in a cultural exchange between the province of Quebec and the province of Alberta. Some 58 students, accompanied by Mr. Michael Perry and Elizabeth Holt. I'd ask them, Mr. Speaker, to stand and be recognized by the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased today to introduce to you and through you to members of this Assembly an individual that is in the Members Gallery who is well known to many of the people of this Assembly. He's a director of the Calgary Immigrant Aid Society and the Calgary Vietnamese Association. He is a gentleman committed to the ethnocultural community in Alberta, and I would ask that Mr. Dat Nguyen stand and receive the warm reception traditional of this Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I have a privilege today to introduce to you and members of the Assembly some very special guests seated in your gallery. They are here in Edmonton attending the Canadian Teachers Federation Convention, and I had the privilege of having dinner with them last evening, and I would like to introduce them to you. Firstly, from the Canadian Teachers Federation, Mr. Frank Garrity, President, Ms. Sheena Hanley, President-elect, and Mr. Brian Shortall, past President. Also with us today are presidents of provincial teachers' associations from across Canada, one of whom will be familiar to all of us, and that is Nadine Thomas, the president of our own Alberta Teachers Association. With Mrs. Thomas are 13 of her colleagues from across Canada, and I would ask them all to stand, please. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased as well to introduce some very distinguished international visitors who are also attending the convention here in Edmonton. They are Jim Killeen, President of the World Confederation of Organizations of Teaching Professions. He's the president of that group. Mr. Norm Golbo, the Secretary General. Mr. Adam Urbanski, the American Federation of Teachers Vice President. Mr. Robert Richardson, the President of the National Union of Teachers of England and Wales. Mr. Randall Pateni, the President of the African Teachers Association of South Africa. And Mr. Tim Bediako, who is the General Secretary of the All Africa Teachers Organization.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure also to introduce to you and through you a group of 50 individuals with their teachers and parents from the Rural Youth Seminar, and I would ask if the Chamber would extend the traditional warm welcome to them, and if they would rise. They are in the public gallery, please.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Premier.
If I might beg the indulgence of the Assembly with respect to a statement concerning ministerial responses after question period, if we might read that into the record before we commence with the honorable leaders. The Chair also notes that the number of introductions today, I'm sure all members of the Assembly are somewhat taken aback that the galleries are entirely filled, and perhaps all members might take into consideration this innovative technique that we should indeed meet all summer long every year. This statement will be immediately passed out to all members of the Assembly. Concerning supplementary and delayed answers to oral questions, the Chair has convened 2 meetings of House leaders representing all parties represented in the Legislative Assembly to consider the matter of supplementary responses to answers given earlier and responses to questions taken as notice. The House leaders have unanimously agreed that ministers should be allowed at the end of oral question period to briefly supplement answers given previously and to respond to questions taken as notice. The House leaders have further agreed that the member whose question has received a delayed response may ask one further brief supplementary question and a minister and the minister may respond to such supplementary question. Strict adherence to procedural rules would require the unanimous consent of the House on each occasion when this practice is undertaken. The Chair has, however, noted that House leaders have unanimously agreed to this provision and will assume the House has given unanimous consent unless any member voices a contrary opinion. Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Premier. There's been some discussion in the Assembly this week about wasteful spending, and I'd like to ask today about some real big-ticket items, like the 75% current projected cost overrun for the Old Man Dam from $200 million to $349 million. My question to the Premier, has the Premier issued a directive or ordered a study or done anything at all to try and get some control over massive cost overruns on government projects?
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously that would be something we'd be doing constantly. It doesn't require a particular directive. It's something that has been expressed to all members of the government, both the elected and non-elected, and to the public service.
Well, supplementary question, and it's obviously not working very well when we have these types of overruns, and there's a history of this, Mr. Premier. But let me be more specific. Has the Premier given any consideration to asking one particular member of Executive Council, such as perhaps a Deputy Premier, to be responsible for developing measures to prevent cost overruns on large government construction projects? I believe there's an example of this in Ontario at this time.
Here.
Mr. Speaker, it's a suggestion I will give consideration to, but as I said earlier, we are working on these matters constantly on an everyday basis.
Well, let me shift over to the Minister of Environment. As the Minister is responsible for overseeing the construction of this particular dam, I wonder if he could tell us, the Minister of Dams, if he's had any disciplinary measures have been taken in his department as a consequence of this huge jump in the projected cost of this project.
Mr. Speaker, I'm the Minister of the Environment. I'm not sure if he wants that question directed to me or not.
Minister of the Environment, I said at the start, don't waste the supplementary.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, there's been no cost overrun. The innuendo alluded to by the Leader of the Official Opposition in directing his first two questions, the Premier suggested that there was a cost overrun. It was very, very clear in the comments made in the Assembly on Wednesday last by myself that the original estimate talked about in August of 1984 was a preliminary estimate. It was based on data, information provided to Alberta Environment as a result of studies conducted in the 60s, early 60s, early 70s by the PFRA. We indicated at that time when the former Premier made the announcement that it was an estimate of costs. The figures that I made public on Wednesday last are projected costs as of July 9, 1986.
Well, that's a very interesting answer, Mr. Speaker, because in question period in July the 10th, the Minister was asked if he was doing anything to curb these alarming cost overruns, and the answer to the question is an emphatic yes. So he agreed that there was overruns at that time, but to be more specific, could the Minister briefly tell us what specific steps he has, flowing from that answer, taken, or if he cannot be brief, which is very difficult for this Minister, will he undertake to table a written report this session on the specific steps that the Minister has taken?
Mr. Speaker, on Thursday, July 10, the response yes that I gave to was the result of a second question directed to me by the member from Edmonton Glengarry. And in the first or the second of 3 questions he directed to me, he had another innuendo that caused me to respond yes to a 2-part question. Now, when I responded last Thursday, I said that I had this matter under hand. I intend on having this matter under hand. I intend on being very, very vigilant about cost security with respect to this project. And if you would like to refer, if the honourable member leader would like to refer to the comments that I made on Wednesday, July the 8th, in Hansard, I made emphatic comments with respect to certain concerns that I had. I also pointed out that I would be assured as the years go by that all members of the Legislative Assembly would not escape an opportunity to point out to me any variance from the $349.6 million attached to the Old Man River Dam. I also indicated at that time that I would be very vigilant with respect to any cost overruns beyond 349.6 that might be brought to my attention by officials in the department.
Supplementary, member for Little Bow.
Supplementary question to either the provincial treasurer or the premier with regards to expenditure control. Could the premier or the minister indicate whether the government has a policy at this time whereby if increased expenditure is requested either by the government or other parties in this legislature or by the people of Alberta, that there's a policy in place that indicates that that policy to be implemented by an increase in expenditure must be a trade-off of expenditures in other places of government?
Mr. Speaker, I guess the way the honourable member for Little Bow has placed that question, he is really describing what you go through when you are preparing a budget or considering additional expenditures. We don't have all the money in the world, and therefore we have to make a series of choices based on priorities. And he is right that when you select one, you must, or if we have one suggested from members of the opposition or anywhere in the House, it would normally involve, therefore, dropping something else, because we do not have all the money we would want to have. And therefore, we do the very thing he described constantly.
Ms. Locke Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, in view of the fact that the rather sloppy type of supervision seems to be showing up here into supervising costs, particularly in dam building, will the Premier, or is the Premier in a position now to say, as he said he was considering it earlier, to announce the commission to investigate costs very much the same as the Federal Nielsen Commission that would be in charge of going through departments parrying costs?
As I responded, Mr. Speaker, when the honourable member raised that issue with me several days ago, that I thought his suggestion was one to give consideration to. Obviously, the federal government did, and I know some other provincial governments have or are considering such moves. But as I responded to him, we will think about that, but we want to be certain that the things we are doing now are not working, and it's my judgment at this point that they are working. I tell him that the lead up to his question was incorrect. This is not a matter of sloppy handling of construction at all. This is a matter, as the Minister of Environment said, of an original estimate that was used in the House. I suppose the members might have wanted for the information not to come out at all until the final engineering estimate was completed, and then they wouldn't have had the original estimate to compare to. But nevertheless, the estimate done on a detailed engineering basis has been announced by the Honourable Minister of Environment. It was significantly different from the original figure used, that we had another independent engineering evaluation done just to confirm it, which it did. And it confirmed that there were a series of things involved with the subsoil and so on that would require to have this dam be built in the safest, most effective way, that it involved the kind of expenditure that the minister announced.
Member for Lethbridge West.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister. Has the Minister had a representation from either farm organizations or municipal governments in southern Alberta not to proceed with the Old Man Dam?
Mr. Speaker, the water management in southern Alberta and economic diversification of the southern part of the province is a high priority with this government, and I've certainly had no representations to reject either of those two objectives.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. The Chair was a bit slow. The question really truly was not related to the main issue, which is in regard to cost control. Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd hate to see what the overrun would be if the system wasn't working. But my question is to the Premier, and it has to do with his meeting with his colleagues today, with the Alberta MPs. And I take by the meeting that presumably the Deputy Prime Minister was there and the Minister of External Affairs. My question to the Premier was any firm commitment given on behalf of the Government of Canada that the full amount of loan guarantees for the Husky Upgrader project will be provided this year.
Mr. Speaker, to advise the honourable member, the Deputy Prime Minister was in attendance. The Minister of External Affairs was not able to be there. However, there was a large turnout of members of Parliament. There is some interest in this on the part of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. I should tell him that it was a very good meeting. We were able to discuss matters of interest to all Albertans represented by the people in the meeting. He should also know that the Husky Upgrader is proceeding as planned, and the construction decision, which needs to be made, will be made in 1987. And I feel confident that at that time we will be able to announce that it is going ahead, and will provide a large supply of future resources to the people of Alberta and Canada.
It's Mr. Speaker, I was asking about commitments. I'm glad the Premier feels so confident, but he's felt confident before. Hasn't worked out, but perhaps, Mr. Speaker, we should hire Mr. Moores, ex-Premier of Newfoundland, to advise us on how to get loans in Alberta. But my question to the Premier, rather than just a nice discussion, were they able to come to any commitments? And, for example, obviously not the first one, but did the meeting result in any commitment then to an early end to the PGRT, say before the end of this year?
Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Leader of the Opposition would probably expect, that the discussion between ourselves as caucuses was not one which you would expect to have a government announcement come from. I felt we had an excellent discussion that will lead to commitments that I feel very confident the people of Alberta will be pleased with.
Well, supplementary, Mr. Premier, I'm very glad that you had a nice chat with your friends. But we're in a crisis situation. I'll turn to one other industry. Was any commitment, firm commitment, given on a federal deficiency payment to support grain producers in this province?
I gather the applause is for phrasing a question correctly. Mr. Speaker, the matter of the deficiency payment for grain producers was discussed, and as per my previous answer, I feel that the discussion was very productive, and that should events happen that would make that something that should be done to assist our agricultural industry and other things that would be needed for assistance to our agricultural industry, that the people in that room would work very closely and vigorously to have those things happen.
Something that just makes me feel warm and fuzzy all over. My question to the Premier then, obviously there's no commitments, and they had a nice chat and some tea, I suppose, but my question then, the previous Premier one time had to be very strong with the MPs from this province because he didn't feel that they were taking up Alberta's interests in the proper fashion. My question, did the Premier take any similar action during this morning's meeting which indicated this government's concern about how Alberta's been taken for granted since Conservatives were elected federally?
I would assume, Mr. Speaker, warm in the tummy and fuzzy in the head. Mr. Mr. Speaker, we did have a good discussion on how we relate with our federal colleagues, and I feel that the messages that were necessary to be passed to them were.
Supplementary, Leader of the Liberal Party.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Leader, or to the Premier. Freudian slip. If he keeps up his present activity, I'll send him an honorary Liberal membership. We'll see if he can phrase the answers as good as the questions. Could the Minister could he tell us whether or not the equity package proposal for small producers, which the Premier and the Minister of Energy has talked about with some pride for nearly 3 weeks now, was that discussed with your federal cousins when you?
Mr. Speaker, if I was to accept an honorary Liberal membership, I hear I'd be the first one who would accept one. Mr. Speaker, a whole matter of assistance for the energy industry was considered. We aren't particularly married to the equity plan that the member has mentioned. It is one option that we mentioned in the House. There are others, though, that are being considered, and we think that we have put in place the mechanism under which we will be able to develop the one that will work in this province.
Member for Little Bow.
Supplementary question to the Premier. It's relative to the Alberta Farm Credit Program. I was wondering, was that matter discussed with the representatives of the federal government to assure Albertans, and as well assure the government of Alberta, that the federal government will not withdraw from certain credit programs in the province of Alberta because of the Alberta Farm Credit Program that we're going to implement fairly shortly, I believe?
Mr. Speaker, it wasn't dealt with in quite that way, but I must say we did deal with the fact that we have made such a large move to reduce input costs to our farmers in both the cost of money, as the member mentions, the cost of fertilizer, and the additional costs of 64 cents in the matter of energy. However, it is fair to say that in our discussion, it was clear that moves that we made as a provincial government would not lead the federal members to advocate or allow the federal government to pull back with their own programs.
Main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, to the Premier, in the last federal budget, Ottawa introduced the Atlantic Enterprise Program, which was to spend or have $1 billion credit available to the Atlantic provinces for tourism and primary industry development. Now, can the Premier tell the members of this legislature whether he's found out whether the $1 billion Hibernia loan is part of that Atlantic Enterprise Program, or is it an additional $1 billion over and outside that $1 billion budget program?
Mr. Speaker, I shouldn't answer for the federal government on their programs. That's not my responsibility. But in terms of raising the matter of any Hibernia assistance, I think I can advise the House that there has been no decision or no commitment of any kind in the Hibernia area, as alluded to by the by the member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Supplementary, it would appear then that it's over and above if it's promised. In yesterday's meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister, did the Deputy Prime Minister promise to try and secure a similar billion-dollar line of credit or promise for the West?
The meeting was today, Mr. Speaker, and the discussion was along the lines of developing what is needed to assist Alberta, and I'm sure consideration would be given for other parts of the West. But we are working on the things that are needed in this province, and we feel that others may well work to their own benefit. And in our discussions between ourselves and our colleagues, and between myself and the Deputy Prime Minister, I'm sure that we will be able to develop the federal-provincial cooperation to come up with that type of a program.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Seems it may be for years, it may be forever, but a simple yes or no. Did the Premier receive a commitment from the Deputy Prime Minister that he would work to abolish the PGRT as soon as possible?
Mr. Speaker, it would be comfortable to give yes or no's, and when I do, sometimes I notice the members don't particularly like them. But I had a feeling, Mr. Speaker, that all of us in the room were working in that direction.
Final supplementary to the Premier. He often asks for constructive suggestions. Could the Premier discuss with the federal government the possibility of setting up a $700 million program from which both small and large producers would be eligible for funding in lieu of dropping the PGRT? Just a little $700 million charge account.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think we should have the PGRT, period. And if we develop other programs, I think, and we will, and we are working on them, that are necessary, then we will announce them to the House as quickly as possible. But I don't think we should accept the PGRT in any event.
Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
To the Premier, Mr. Speaker, what did the Premier indicate to his federal counterparts in the meeting today that would be of benefit to the West and to Alberta in particular?
Mr. Speaker, we had a discussion for some 3.5 hours in which were many things discussed of advantage to this province and to the people that we all represent. I don't think my going into the details of that discussion would be helpful to the results that we hope to obtain.
The Leader of the Representative Party, followed by the member for Calgary-McCall.
Mr. Speaker, this is my main question. It's to the Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Speaker, and it's relative to the question I asked earlier to the Premier with regards to the Alberta Farm Credit Stability Program and also the Farm Credit Corporation Program of Canada. My question, in the latest annual report, 1985-86 of the Farm Credit Corporation, they show losses of some $121 million and in operating and loan losses of $190 million. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is, can the Minister of Agriculture advise us in this Assembly whether the Farm Credit Corporation loans will be, are able to be refinanced under the Alberta Farm Credit Stability Program?
Mr. Speaker, in responding to the honourable member for Little Bow, let me indicate to him that that provision will be there, whereby in the event that individuals do wish to roll over the funding that they do presently have under the Farm Credit Corporation onto our program, that will be available to them. Let me also indicate to him, though, a very important point as it relates to the federal government. With every decrease by 1 percentage point in our interest rates, the farming population saves somewhere in the vicinity of $240 million. And unlike the two main parties opposite, we are concerned about that along with our federal counterparts so that interest rates are at a lower level so that our agricultural sector can take advantage of it.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate at this time how much that possible refinancing will cost if the Farm Credit Corporation loans are all rolled over into the Alberta Farm Credit Stability Program?
Mr. Speaker, in responding to the honourable member again, can I underscore what I had mentioned quite some time ago, whereby I have suggested to our federal counterpart at the federal level that he drop the interest rates within the Farm Credit Corporation to 9 percentage points, and in the event that interest rates are dropped further than what they already have done, because they have dropped the interest rates within the Farm Credit Corporation to date already, the possibility of that happening would be that much smaller. But I can share in a direct answer to the honourable member, there is somewhere in the vicinity of $900 million borrowed in Alberta under the Farm Credit Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. In terms of the answer provided by the Premier and also in terms of the Minister's responsibility to protect the Alberta Farm Credit Stability Program for a cross-section of farmers in Alberta, and also the information now given that approximately half of the $2 billion could be taken up by the farmers that have Farm Credit Corporation loans at the present time. Could the Minister indicate what steps could be implemented or are planned to be implemented to prevent that from happening, and so that new money can be available for the farmers of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, that is what I had indicated earlier to the honourable member, as to why I made the representations to our federal counterpart with the hopes of them lowering interest rates, since they have been so successful in lowering the interest rates on a Canada-wide level. We're hopeful that they can follow through with the Farm Credit Corporation so that there will not be too much of a rollover. As it relates to what type of a rollover there will be, that is so hypothetical, I would hate to even guess as to what amount will be transferred.
Mr. Speaker, a final supplementary. Certainly as a farmer, you can get 1.5% less interest, you're going to roll your loan over, I would think. Could the Minister indicate what commitments the federal government has given or the federal minister has given with regards to this? Or is there going to be further discussions planned prior to the final implementation of this program in the province of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, there is ongoing discussions with our federal counterparts on a continuous basis. I look forward to sitting down with the Federal Minister of Agriculture when we do gather together with him and the other provincial ministers of agriculture on the week of August the 24th. And we are looking at the entire area of farm financing, trade, and a number of other issues and initiatives that both levels of government are involved with. But we're looking forward to his response. To date, he has not responded to my suggestion. When he does, I'm more than happy to make that response available to the honourable member.
Member for Calgary. Member for Vegreville.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Provincial Treasurer. Will the Minister, recognizing that the rate at which Treasury bills are trading at is significantly lower now than it was when the program was announced some 4 months ago, will he take the bold step of announcing a lower rate, a more helpful rate for this program?
I was very pleased, Mr. Speaker, to learn that the prime rate did in fact drop to 9.75, but all the concerns and inputs in terms of the cost of borrowing must be reflected in any decision to change the 9% interest rate. I'm not prepared at this point to make any announcement in response to the member from Vegreville.
Member for Calgary McCall, followed by the member for Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to address the minister responsible for housing. Mr. Speaker, I've been given information that for some senior citizens and possibly others who receive rental rebate checks from the government, that these checks have not been received as yet and are being told that they are just late. And not last year they were received in June. And I wonder if the minister could confirm that these rental rebates for our seniors and others are being sent out late, and if so, why?
Mr. Speaker, actually the process is the same as in previous years. The process takes from about the middle of June to the end of August to complete, because people make applications. Perhaps the ones who applied in June last year applied later this year. About 60% of the checks have already gone out.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. In light of the fact that it appears that these checks were received at an earlier time last year, could the minister examine the department in light of this unfortunate situation, as I determine, to ensure that these checks are sent out at an earlier date and keeping them on a consistent basis in the future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would certainly always be glad to examine the effectiveness of the process and the getting out of the checks, which is certainly very important. I would, in making that clear, also want to point out perhaps again that the process is no different from in previous years, and applications must be received. This is mid-July. The balance of the checks should be out within about 6 weeks. The first of them did go out about 1 month ago.
Supplementary.
The Honourable Premier, can the Premier indicate if any discussion has been taking place in Cabinet to ensure that when checks go from one level of government to another level of government, that the checks go directly to that lower level of government, let's say the municipality, rather than go through the MLA's office?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member knows, that matters are discussed in Cabinet are not discussed publicly. If he is making a representation in that regard, and he finds that there are problems with it, the way it's currently being handled, if he lets me know, we will give it a review.
Calgary, Buffalo, followed by the member for Vegreville.
A question to the Honourable Solicitor General, Mr. Speaker. There have been several tragic deaths in the last few days in Calgary and Edmonton in which impaired driving charges have been laid. Citizens groups have been critical of the government's inaction in dealing with the impaired driving problem in recent years. The question is to the Solicitor General, will the government finally take action as recommended by these citizens groups and by the Canadian Bar Association and provide direct funding to police services to increase the number of check stops, since the current risk of apprehension is in the range of only 1 in 2,000?
Mr. Speaker, I too am appalled at the tragedies that seem to happen through impaired driving. The Solicitor General's Department does presently fund Check Stop. The City of Calgary Police Force has an intensive program through Checkpoint, but the City of Edmonton Police Force finds that they have a tailor-made program not called Check Stop that does the same effect. Our department is open to any suggestions in helping to alleviate the problems through impaired driving and would welcome the member opposite's comments.
A supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to either the Solicitor General or the Attorney General, since there may be overlapping jurisdiction. What does the Minister plan to do to improve the government's mediocre record in finding and prosecuting those drivers who are continuing to drive while their license is under suspension as a result of conviction from impaired driving?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Attorney General may wish to supplement my answer. Through the Motor Vehicle Division, we have presently on our computer indications whereby people have their licenses suspended, and during any infraction, if the police officer has the time to go back to his car and call in and check through the computer, you can then detain and probably arrest the person. In fact, I might mention that this is happening and that we are finding that innumerable people that are driving while suspended, and the police force are doing, I think, a superb job in pursuing it.
Well, I would hope that it would be made a matter of policy and not haphazard, Mr. Speaker, but the citizens groups have also been critical about the fact that the government has been soft on repeat offenders. A supplementary to the Attorney General, will the Minister undertake to toughen enforcement of laws against repeat offenders by seeking the 14-day prison sentence against all such offenders rather than just those in which the second offense has been committed within 2 years of the first as at present?
Mr. Speaker, I'd remind the honourable member for Calgary-Buffalo, who is a lawyer, that it is not the government that passes sentence, it is the courts. And the matter of repeat offenders, of course, is dealt with by prosecutors in the courts, asking for, on a regular basis, the strictest possible enforcement of the law relative to all offenders, particularly in view of the expressed concerns of all Albertans, except those who seem to lose control of themselves when under the control of alcohol, that the laws indeed be enforced. There is one point that I would like to add, perhaps by way of supplementary to the questions answered by the Solicitor General, and that is that consideration should be given, we believe, and is under review now by the Federal Department of Justice and the provincial governments who have responsibility for enforcing those laws, as to the desirability of changes which would permit the impoundment of vehicles of those who may be impaired, and that is something I think would merit close review and consideration. In fact, I think is one of the suggestions that has been made by those people who are concerned about the rising incidence of impaired driving. But, Mr. Speaker, I think that the adjudication and the determination of these matters must be left in the court's hands, and it is up to the government through the Crown prosecutors and agents of the Attorney General to seek and demand, as best we can, the strictest enforcement of the law.
Mr. Speaker, I require no lessons in law from the Attorney General. It is his department which is responsible for instructing prosecutors, and he should know that. Now, supplementary to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, will the government begin to show some basic leadership in its own house, Mr. Premier, by encouraging government employees to designate non-drinking drivers at their social functions, something which the government tells the rest of the community to do but doesn't do itself?
Supplementary, member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Solicitor General, Mr. Speaker, can the Solicitor General assure us that he will take all such steps as may be necessary to ensure that the consequences of failure to take a breathalyzer test, when required to do so, will in all cases be the same as conviction for impaired driving, so far as suspension of license is concerned?
Mr. Speaker, I believe that presently, if you refuse to blow, the common vernacular, that you stand to be suspended for 3 months, whereas if you are over .08, you are suspended for 6 months. That is presently the way I believe the federal law reads under the criminal code, and that is presently the way our suspension reads. I might inform the House that we are investigating the factor of making both of them a suspension for 6 months, but that policy has not been finalized yet.
Member for Clover Bar.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, can the Premier indicate, in light of the accidents we've been having, that we will have a free vote on mandatory use of seat belts at the summer session of this Assembly?
Mr. Speaker, it's a matter I'm giving very serious consideration to.
Member for Calgary-McCall.
Mr. Speaker, as supplementary to the Minister, the Solicitor General, the City of Calgary Police Service feels they need some $775,000 to administer their check stop program. Could the Minister indicate what steps he is taking to obtain funding to ensure a more effective check stop program available to the Police Service of Calgary?
Mr. Speaker, the funding the province gives for policing throughout the province is $18 per capita in the instance of a municipal police force. We do not have a provincial police force in this province. Therefore, the Solicitor General's Department is only contributing to the costs of policing, and each local police commission is under charge of the particular policies and procedures of any police force. The City of Calgary receives the $18, the same as the City of Edmonton. If they so wish to conduct a stop or checkpoint, check stop program, that's certainly within their jurisdiction. If they wish to expand it, they should work it in with their budgeting. I'm open to having discussions with anybody on the costs of policing, but we have a limitation on our particular budget as well.
Member for Vegreville, and if there is time, all of the supplementaries on this issue have been exhausted.
Supplementary information as Chairman of ADAC. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if I might provide some supplementary information in response to the question raised initially by the member for Calgary-Buffalo. There are currently two programs that are being carried out which may be of information to all members. One is the Impaired Driving Countermeasures Coordinating Committee, which has a chair under ADAC, includes members from the Departments of Transportation, the Solicitor General, and the Attorney General, as well as representatives from PAID, People Against Impaired Driving, the Alberta Motor Association, and two private citizens. I expect that that report will be available shortly to the ministers, and I'm sure lead to some interesting recommendations. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I would like to compliment the former chairman and the ADAC Commission with the support of this government for establishing the IMPACT program. The IMPACT program involves repeat offenders and leads to the counseling services to those repeat offenders who go through the program. To date, that program has just been commenced as of last fall, and I'm pleased to report satisfactory progress so far.
Member for Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, and it concerns again the Farm Credit Stability Program. Mr. Speaker, this program continues to both tantalize and frustrate farmers who are anxious for announcement of details regarding the implementation of it, and sometimes this information appears in unusual places. Will the Minister confirm, as announced by the member for Dunvegan a couple of weeks ago, that small trucks will be excluded as purposes considered under this loan program?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the honourable member would love to have more details, and we're working as quickly as we possibly can. And as soon as we have those details ready for publication, and I can share with the honourable member, we're working on the brochure so that we can have it available to the farming sector very quickly. We will release in a very comprehensive way all the details, not only to the honourable member, but to the entire agricultural sector in Alberta.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, some of it's been published apparently. The member from Dunvegan also announced several repayment options. Will the Minister confirm that borrowers will have either the option of blended equal principal and interest payments, or be able to make principal payments and then interest on the declining balance under this program?
Mr. Speaker, as I responded to the honourable member earlier, we are going to in a very detailed way, and we hope to do that in a very short while. I'm sure he can appreciate the complexity of offering $2 billion worth of credit to our agricultural sector at a reduced rate of interest, the complexities involved in getting this on stream with the various lending institutions. And as I indicated to him, we are processing all the material so that we can, in a very comprehensive way, make this available not only to him but to all of the agricultural sector.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Don't feel bad. He scooped the Premier on the telephones announcement during the campaign. Will the Minister, recognizing that in the 4 months since the program was announced, several producers have incurred much greater debt, many through trade accounts, Will the minister comment on my suggestion to him several days ago that provisions of this program be made retroactive to the date the program was announced?
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable member that when the full details of this program are announced, they will be very widely accepted by the agricultural community. It's obvious that the honourable member from Dunvegan is doing his homework, because the majority of those details have been made available over the course of the discussions of this period, but we want to make sure that in a very detailed way we have all that information available to the farming sector so that there will be no misunderstanding. And I can leave the honourable member the assurance, as I'm sure the honourable member from Dunvegan will do, that when he does indicate something, he usually knows what he's talking about.
Peter, table it.
I'll send it over to you. I'll be more general in my final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister indicate whether
has expired? Is the House willing to give permission for the completion of supplementaries on this issue? Thank you. Chair recognizes you, Vegreville.
Has the minister instructed lending institutions that universal standards of conditions and repayments and considerations by which loans will be made are recommended, or will the institutions have their own guidelines to determine these sorts of things?
Mr. Speaker, those guidelines are being set down by this government so that they are offering greater latitude than what are the present lending procedures from our traditional financial institutions, because we wanted to make sure that the spectrum of this program offered more opportunity to our agricultural sector than what the traditional lending institutions do offer. I might just indicate to the honourable member too, Mr. Speaker, when we talk of commitments, this government does live up to the commitments that it does make.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Agriculture, although I know he operates with the speed of a glacier, could he tell me whether or not that is considering, beside not only blending principal and interest, that he will consider in the repayment plan a suspension of payments if the farmer has not had a positive cash flow that year?
Mr. Speaker, all suggestions given by the honourable member from Westlock Sturgeon are given serious consideration, and I will take his representations very seriously, and I thank him for those representations.
In terms of the implementation of the program, is there any new news relative to the date of implementation of the program, and if not, what seem to be the major stumbling blocks at the present time?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Provincial Treasurer had indicated that this program would be available by the 1st of August. It's a commitment that we are very hopeful that we can live up to, and maybe it might even be sooner, but we're very hopeful and we're working very hard to make sure that this program is available as soon as possible to the agricultural sector.
According to the earlier announced statement this day, first we will have a statement and response perhaps from the statement will be given by the Honourable Minister of Community and Occupational Health. Second series of statements and responses will be given by the Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications.
Mr. Speaker, I want to respond to two questions put to me yesterday by the Honourable Member for Clover Bar. The first regarding what systems might be in place to make sure there is no leaching of materials from sanitary landfill sites. I wish to advise, Mr. Speaker, that local boards of health are empowered to restrict what materials may be disposed of in any landfill site in the province. As well, they may require what monitoring wells be put on that site and prescribe the frequency by which these wells will be sampled for leachate. The Public Health Act waste management regulation, Mr. Speaker, prescribes that no hazardous waste may be deposited in a landfill site. As well, no person may deposit any kind of a waste that has not been approved by the Department of the Environment. As for monitoring, Mr. Speaker, a public health inspector inspects all municipal landfill sites at least once a month. They are assisted by officials in Alberta Environment in the sampling of the monitoring wells that are on those sites. The second question, Mr. Speaker, was about the monitoring system in place at summer resorts. The role of the Department of Community and Occupational Health is to provide consulting services to those health units on matters relating to public health engineering practices. The Plumbing and Gas Safety Services branch of the Alberta Department of Labour ensures that the installation of sewage systems at summer resorts are correctly installed and are properly functioning. Alberta Environment monitors surface water areas to make sure that this water is not contaminated from private or industrial sources. And finally, Mr. Speaker, local health units carry out a regular water sampling program as well as a routine inspection of public outdoor toilet facilities.
Clover Bar. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I undertook yesterday, I am responding today to questions raised by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition concerning the co-processing of oil and coal in a bench-type research project involving Hydrocarbon Research Incorporated of New Jersey, the Electric Power Research Institute of California, and the Alberta Research Council. Mr. Speaker, the project costs a total of $2.5 million, and the Alberta Research Council share is 10%. That share is contributed by laboratory research being done at the Alberta Research Council, and in fact no funds cross the border north to south or south to north. This is a collaborative project combining the leadership advantages and strengths of each one of the three research groups, and I might say the research activities are slightly different for each of those groups. It will provide each partner with the research results. Mr. Speaker, it reflects the international esteem in which the Alberta Research Council is held. It confirms its leadership position and is the least expensive way to gain access to state-of-the-art research results for the Research Council. I wish to commend the Council and hope that all other members of the Assembly would join me for this initiative. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the second portion of the question, which was quite different, I cannot extend the same generosity of answer because I couldn't understand the question, and I would invite the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to read it, and if he has some guidance that he could give as to what he thought he was talking about, we would try to respond.
He's even talking about to go over it with them, Mr. Speaker, but I'll come back and ask one question that I did ask, is that the University of Calgary Engineering Department, we're told, is involved in development of two-phase pipelines. And my question was, it wasn't answered, did the Research Council approach the University of Calgary to see if they might be interested in undertaking this type of research?
Mr. Speaker, I checked that point, and that's the one I'm having difficulty with. The Alberta Research Council is no way involved with any two-phase pipeline research that's ongoing, and I don't know what the honourable member is asking about. If the University of Calgary is undertaking it through the engineering department, they're perfectly able to do so, subject to the funding requirements that are involved. Mr. Speaker, could I suggest that under the rules for the oral question period, I believe these kinds of questions are stretching those rules extensively, and on matters of this kind of detail, they should more properly be put as written questions or advance notice given to ministers to be able to respond to that kind of detail.
Okay. Well, now what are we on to? Are we on to a point of order? I think
I'd like to do that. I don't know how I could make the question much simpler, but I will write it out in big words and do it slowly, and then the minister can watch my lips so he understands. But the question that I make is, we were dealing with an example.
Right enough.
Go get it.
Honourable Leader, perhaps both yourself and the minister involved will have a discussion outside the time of the House, because it's taking up an inordinate amount of time, especially when we've done our utmost in consultation to try to shorten this whole process. And I would assume that the Honourable Minister will take note of your comments today and perhaps do additional research if it is such as required. Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the House, having now read the blues, including my rather ambiguous and unclear statement on a point of order yesterday. I want to make clear I want to withdraw the statement and say that I did not intend any imputation regarding the minister.
Thank you, Honourable Member for Westlock Sturgeon, with respect to that matter. The Chair appreciates the sensitivity of the matter and the generous way in which the member has acted in that regard. Might we revert briefly to introduction of special guests?
Mr. Speaker, I'm honored to introduce to you and through you to the members of this House a distinguished visitor, Mr. Eugene Hiscock, who is a Liberal member of the House of Assembly of Labrador. Mr. Hiscock represents the riding of Eagle River. He has been a candidate for leadership. He's a member of the Select Committee on the new provincial flag for the province, and he is the critic for intergovernmental affairs. May I ask him to rise in the gallery to receive the welcome of this House?
Orders of the day.